Outside Germany, the resistance fighters we know most about are those from the nations attacked by the Nazis. But who is aware of the young people inside Germany who stood up to Hitler's murderous regime? A brother and a sister, Hans and Sophie Scholl, grew up here in Forchtenberg. They founded the White Rose, a resistance group, in June 1942. They wanted to raise awareness among the German people, denounce the crimes of the Nazi regime, and do all they could to precipitate the fall of National Socialism. Hans, Sophie and their friend Christoph were imprisoned and executed in February 1943. They paid the ultimate price in their fight for freedom, democracy and human dignity. Sophie Scholl was born in Forchtenberg. During a period of 10 years, this is where she grew up, where she learned how to walk, made friends, where she learned to speak and love nature. Her mother, Magdalena Scholl, brought her children up with Christian values. She taught catechism, and that's how Hans and Sophie heard about Jesus with the other children at their Sunday school. Sophie was baptized there, in the Lutheran church dedicated to the Archangel Michael on the 10th of July 1921. With her brothers and sisters, she had a wonderful childhood in beautiful countryside, near to water. Water was important for her, and one of the last things she said was, "Our resistance movement will make waves." This is where we return to this water, to these waves, this element that was so important for her. Their father was the mayor of the village. He was a man of duty and rather strict. The mother was all tenderness. When one looks more closely at Hans and Sophie Scholl, one notices two recurring themes: tenderness, sensitivity. But reason also played a key role in their lives. The centre of their lives were the discussions that took place around the family table at mealtimes. The dialogue continued even in the work of the resistance group. Dialogue also played a key role there. Right up to the end, dialogue was a way of life for them. The parents had always made the effort to encourage the children to immerse themselves in reading and to discover music. From the start, they took piano lessons. Sophie also studied art and was very gifted. Encouraging the development of everyone's skills was very important in the family. When Adolf Hitler left prison in 1924 at Landsberg am Lech, no one could have known into what desolation he would thrust millions of people. In 1921, he founded the National Socialist Party of Germany, the NSDAP. And in 1923, he attempted a coup which failed, and Hitler was imprisoned. It was in prison in Landsberg am Lech that he developed his ideology and wrote his book, Mein Kampf. This ideology had a significant influence on the lives of a great number of people, notably on the Scholl family. The Scholl family had a drawing depicting Hitler, and their father would hide it in a drawer. When Hans and his sister Inge came home, they would get it out and hang it up on the wall. This became like a game in the family, despite the significance of the situation. When they lived in Ulm in Adolf Hitler Street, now called Olga Street, the children would watch the Nazi parades enthusiastically. Sure enough, the children were fascinated by the Hitler Youth. They liked living in the countryside, and this is exactly what National Socialism was offering. And for a while, they were happy.
There is no doubt that initially, the Scholl children participated enthusiastically in these movements organized by the NSDAP. I believe that this did not involve any kind of religious indoctrination. It was more about young people parading, emancipating themselves from their parental bonds. They went with the flow and later took on positions of responsibility, of leadership roles.
Their mother was not a political person. She let her children do as they wanted. This was probably right. In any case, what else could she do? Their father never stopped encouraging discussion with his children. Dialogue was of the utmost importance. The children were asked to express their opinions. They could say what they thought, even if they held different opinions to their parents.
We can be quite certain that for Hans Scholl, doubts began to emerge in 1935 with the Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg. He became aware of the impact that such a mass meeting could have on young people. So his thinking evolved, and this change was certainly encouraged by his parents, particularly in the light of their opinion of the new National Socialist regime, of which they did not approve. I believe that it was their upbringing that provided a favorable breeding ground that allowed each one to grow intellectually and to develop their own beliefs.
I do not feel any desire to be a war hero. I am looking for purification. I want every shadow inside me to disappear. It's myself that I'm seeking, nothing but myself, because I know that I can only find the truth in myself.
After the so-called Blitzkrieg and lightning victories, the number of supporters of the system became enormous throughout Germany, until 1942. But then people suddenly became aware that this terrible war would not end anytime soon, that young people were dying, and the extermination of the Jewish people was known about, at the very least, by the members of the White Rose. I believe that this was part of a learning process that was leading them, first and foremost, towards an unambiguous and radical opposition. This opposition led Hans Scholl and Alexander Schmorell to take action during the summer months, in June and July 1942. For me, I find the words of Willy Graf particularly memorable when he says, "Everyone bears all the responsibility." Willy Graf took another path. He was always critical of the regime, although his father was a supporter of the Nazi Party.
The memorials to the German resistance fighters in Germany are now visited by the youth of the entire world. They want to know about these brave people. We met a former member of the Ulm section of the White Rose. Franz Josef Müller was responsible at the time for supplying the stamps and envelopes that they needed.
I knew a few priests who were the exact opposite of the Nazis and the instructors of the Hitler Youth. These priests had a good library, And after 5 to 6 years of reading the entire library, as well as other books, I had reached the point where I believed the Nazis were the equivalent to the devil. I believed that if they came to power, we would get caught in their whirlwind along with the majority of the German people, and that we would be sucked into their whirlwind. That's when I understood that we had to defend ourselves. We did not wish to die. We wanted to live in a free Germany and a free Europe. That's why we decided to duplicate the white rose tracts behind the organ in the Catholic Church. The Nazis would never find them there. At the age of 18, we had more foresight than Adolf Hitler. We understood what would happen. We believed that as long as the Nazis and the communists continued to exist, there would be no more freedom. This was for sure. But finally, this is what we obtained. And we made a humble contribution with our tracts. We could not have done more. We sent 5 copies of the tracts to Hitler directly, to his different addresses, Berghof, Berchtesgaden, Berlin, etc., so that we could be sure that they would reach their destination. I think he must have been annoyed to see young Germans behaving so freely in Germany, particularly the fact that we were young Germans.
Hans wrote a little later in a letter, "In order to prevent this evil spirit from spreading, we must not win this war." Then other people, other friends joined the group and played an important role. For example, Ott Eicher had a big influence on the Scholl siblings. However, Hans had a unique personality. He formed his own opinions. Part of the reason for this radical change in thinking was his teacher, Karl Muth, in Munich, who played a role in his spiritual development. Hans confessed, "As for myself, Christ has been born in me." A journey towards Christ in a manner like that of Hans, who was so aware of where he was going, I think there's a magnificent life story awaiting discovery that would teach us many things.
Dear Professor, these few words of thanks are easier to write than to say. I am filled with joy to be able to celebrate Christmas for the first time as a true and totally committed Christian. I had been struggling for an unproductive time along fruitless pathways that invariably led to the same feeling of desolation and inner emptiness. Then one day, from somewhere, the solution arrived. I heard and welcomed the name of the Lord. This was the time when I met you, Professor. Then it became clearer, day after day. I pray. I feel that I'm standing on more solid ground, and I can see more clearly. This year, Christ has been born in me. Yours, Hans Scholl.
I was a choir boy for either the 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock morning mass. The churches were full during the Nazi period, really full. This is not well enough known today. There were people standing. They had to find hope somewhere. I went to communion every Sunday because it was the only thing that remained the same. Everything else was changing. For me, the church was an incredible help, a buoy, a life buoy that I could hang on to.
When Hans was a doctor in training on the Russian front, he was particularly interested in the Russian people. His friend in the resistance, Alexander Schmorell, one of whose parents was Russian, helped him to understand the beauty of the Russian soul. And now, must he now fight against this great soul? He had great difficulty understanding and accepting that. He said, "As for us, we hardly know the poets Schiller or Goethe, and every peasant has heard of Dostoevsky." He had understood something fundamental. It's unbelievable.
O God of love, help me to conquer my doubts. Yes, I see that creation is your work, and that it is good, but I also see the work of man, our work, which is cruel, which is calling us to destruction and despair, and it always afflicts the innocent. Save your children. How much longer must they suffer? Why is suffering so unjustly inflicted? When will the storm remove all these unholy people who are defiling your image?
For the German soldiers, it was forbidden to have any contact with the Russian population. Of course, they disobeyed. They had contact. They drank schnapps with the peasants. Hans spent some time in the steppes. He had a Russian friend. He learned Russian. He went to the Orthodox Church. He said the women would sit and nurse their babies in the church. There's a climate of prayer there. He felt much more devotion there than in church at home. The God who is ever close, the God of mercy, revealed himself to the children through their mother. He became their rock. Just as Jacob fought with the angel, we could say that Sophie often did battle with God. When she really found it hard in the compulsory work service at Krauchen-Wiesheim, God became her refuge once again. It was the first time she had left her parents' home. She balked at doing this work. She was not at all at ease. And while her colleagues were convinced supporters of Nazism, Sophie was secretly reading St. Augustine. She was fighting against God, but at the same time, he was her refuge.
I am so weak. I cannot renounce my own will, which I well know is ill-considered and selfish, in order to abandon myself to his will. I pray every evening that he should tear away my will, which makes me hold on to my own stupid power, in order to submit myself to his will. I've known for a long time that his will is good, and I want to submit mine to it. I ask for a compassionate heart, because how can I love without one? I put my powerless love into your hands, so it will become more powerful.
Sophie became friendly with Fritz Hartnagel, an officer and supporter of the Wehrmacht, who was much older than she was. Through this close friendship and the numerous letters they exchanged, Sophie and Fritz debated a great deal. Sophie asked, "Would you do this or that for your country?" Or, "How far exactly can a man go for his country?" Sophie was intransigent. She said, "A person can't be obliged to support a father who chooses to do wrong." This reflects her radical rejection of the system. Her action was coherent and faithful to her conscience. She expressed her opinion, knowing the risks she was running, knowing it could lead to the death penalty. Of course, they all wanted to live. They were young people who loved life.
What is interesting is to see how these young people managed to get hold of the necessary equipment to produce tracts. It wasn't easy to get hold of things in Nazi Germany after 1939, after the start of the war. Paper, ink, Never mind equipment, a typewriter. And even more dangerous, the rotary duplicating machine. These machines were, of course, strictly forbidden, except under strict surveillance of the state secret police. We know where the typewriter came from, and we also know that this typewriter wasn't on the Gestapo's inventory of equipment. So it was a clean machine, as we might say today. The Gestapo did not know about it. And in a way, the young people succeeded in not leaving any traces behind them. Of course, the Gestapo knew that a lot of paper had been bought, but they couldn't follow any leads in order to learn where it came from. Afterwards, of course, they had to buy lots of envelopes as well. This was also dangerous and very suspicious. So it seems to me that the provision of these things showed the commitment and the professionalism and the extreme courage of these students from the White Rose in Germany, considering the conditions of the time.
Hans and Sophie Scholl distributed the 6th leaflet of the White Rose on the 18th of February 1943 at the University of Munich. While Sophie was throwing a pile of tracts over the stairwell in the entrance hall, she was spotted by the guard. Hans and Sophie were arrested and put into prison. Hans tried to swallow a handwritten note from Christoph Probst, which he had in his pocket. The Gestapo stopped him violently. Christoph was thus also arrested. Hans, Sophie and Christoph were condemned to death on the 22nd of February for high treason and working with the enemy. The Lutheran chaplain in the prison visited Hans just before his death. They prayed Psalm 90. Lord, you are our refuge from age to age. Before the mountains were born, or you created the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting you are God. Then they prayed the hymn of love from the Apostle Paul. Now 3 things remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Then the chaplain went to see Sophie. They celebrated the Lord's Supper. Sophie asked the pastor to greet her brother one last time. As for Christoph, he asked for baptism. The sentence was carried out the same day. Here is an important point. When man consciously carries out certain acts, and he knows why he's doing them, it's a bit like, the comparison's a bit extreme, but it's like people in the Middle Ages who were burnt at the stake for their faith. They were witnesses to a kind of greatness, a light, an inner warmth. There was pain, without a doubt, but this suffering was also a kind of release. When Sophie's parents met her in the prison, they could testify to a special presence. They were brought close together there, and the mother said, "I'm proud of you. Despite everything I know, I'm always overwhelmed when I see parents showing such strength." All the strength of the Scholl family flowed into these words spoken without any reproach. "We are proud of you. You did the right thing." Or again in the courtroom, the father said, "If no one defends my children, I will do it. There is another kind of justice." And Sophie added, addressing herself to Judge Roland Freisler, "Today it is us, but your turn will come. We are saying what is right, not you." You could see an immense liberation in her face. Then they shared the Lord's Supper with Kalmuth, who himself reported these moments in an amazing way. He said, "When we leave, and when we don't hold a grudge against anybody, we are already," religious words are perhaps excessive, "as if we are lifted up to heaven." 2 days before her arrest, Sophie wrote to her friend Lisa Rempis.
I've just been listening to the Trout Quintet on the gramophone. Listening to the Andantino, I really wanted to become a trout. I am so looking forward to the return of spring. In this piece of Schubert, we can really feel and breathe the breeze and the scents. We can hear the birds and the whole of creation calling joyfully. And in the repeat of the piano theme, the water is so cool, pure, sparkling. How enchanting. Send me your news. With all my heart, your Sophie. When I arrived in Munich, I very quickly heard about Hans and Sophie Scholl. As a sign of gratitude, a memorial has been built in front of the university, and every day we find there a fresh white rose. I also lived in the same road as Hans and Sophie. I think that the members of the White Rose have a special importance today. It is crucial to realize that you don't necessarily have to be like everybody else. We need to have our own opinions. We need to question ourselves and think for ourselves, to reflect on all the things we read about. All the news with which we're swamped in today's world doesn't necessarily make us think for ourselves.
Hans and Sophie went through a great process of discernment, and their criteria for this were their own personal conscience and their faith. This is very important. Another thing I discovered when reading a letter that Sophie had written to her friend Fritz Hartnagel is that she asked him, "Please protect me in prayer." It's very important to ask other people, "Please pray for me."
Prayer is a help, but it's also a challenge. Because when I come to prayer, I have no idea what to expect. I don't know what I'm going to hear. And this makes me a little bit frightened, because this is the very place where I abandon my safety, my own mental ideas, etc. But on the other hand, it's worth it. Otherwise, I remain trapped inside my own ideas and worries. Through prayer, I manage to hear something which surprises me and frees me from these very thoughts which close me in. I notice that I'm speaking to someone. There is a person who knows me well, who loves me, and so I can overcome my fear. I can trust and be open.
Alexander Schmorell was arrested on the 24th of February 1943, Professor Kurt Huber on the 27th. They were condemned to death together with Willy Graf. The parents and sisters of Hans and Sophie were imprisoned for many months. The young brother, Werner, died on the Russian front in 1944. Today, let us pray for the future of Germany and remember the verses that Hans Scholl prayed before his execution. Love takes no pleasure in wrongdoing, but has joy in what is true. Love has the power of undergoing all things, having faith in all things, hoping all things. But now we still have faith, hope, love, these three, and the greatest of these is love.